and we made it. 2023 is over. It's done. We're done. There was so many things that happened. There's lots of wars, there's lots of storms, lots of natural disasters and chaos and decay. But I read 80 books. And so today I'm going to tell you about my top 5 books that I read in 2023. This year was hard. Like most years are hard, to be fair. I find it really difficult to find like favorites enough in the year to actually meet the criteria for favorite books of XYZ year. But this year was particularly hard because I feel like I didn't actually read a lot of like good books this year. I didn't enjoy many of the books I read this year. But I have curated a list. These are the books that I personally, in my opinion, really enjoyed this year. You do not have to also like them. We are different people, we have different experiences, we're going to have different likes and dislikes in books. So without further ado, let's just jump into it. Number 5 is To Be Totally Fortunate by Becky Chambers. This is a cozy sci-fi novella that, along with exploring somewhat of a mystery storytelling narrative, also unpacks the relationships between the 4 characters who are traveling space, exploring different worlds over the span of decades. 2 years in a row, Becky Chambers has made it into my top 5 books. It is for good reason. Her writing and her prose is just so compulsively readable, with imagery and literal world building that is so vivid that my tiny end of the year pea brain did not take much to generate the movie in my brain. Not only is the composition of the book fantastic, but I really enjoyed the character profiles that we also developed. Like I said, we follow the 4 different characters that are exploring space, and we get to experience the full range of human emotions and relationships within the 150 pages, which didn't feel like not enough either. Like it managed to do all of that within the 150 pages, which I think is one of the huge strengths of the book. And I didn't necessarily like any of the characters. They all had their own flaws, they all had all of their own quirks and traits, as we all do, but I really feel like that added to the human nature of the book and really added to the theme and the plot and the story. If you like Becky Chambers' other sci-fi, which is The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, I think you will like this. It is only 150 pages. I read this in one day, almost in one sitting, and it left me contemplating everything that is in existence. Number 4 was Garlic and the Vampire by Brie Polson. This is a graphic novel that follows sentient vegetables. I've talked about it many times ad nauseum. I have a video where I read it. You can go watch that if you want to. But Garlic is now in my top 5 favorite characters of any book or graphic novel that I've read before. This is a graphic novel that follows a small village of sentient vegetables who all work for a witch to grow and sell produce to the wider village and the local town. But the vegetable village is thrown into chaos when they realize that a vampire has moved into the house on the hill, and the vegetables of the village nominate Garlic to go and confront the vampire because she's impervious. Garlic is such a wholesome and human-like character with her anxious tendencies and worries, but the other characters were also just as rich. I really enjoyed Carrot's character as well. I do wish that we got to know a few more of them a bit better, but I am aware that there is a second one and I will be reading it as soon as I can. I say this about most graphic novels that I read, but I do really enjoy the art style for this one. 2 things particularly, the color palette and the earthy tones that are really consistent with that, but also the facial expressions. They are the best of any of the graphic novels that I have read to date. A+ for facial expressions. Like this page alone shows you the range of facial expressions for Garlic. It so clearly conveys so much emotion. The theme was really clear. The story was equally simple and compelling. I really loved Garlic and the Vampire, and I think that this is one that I will just recommend to anyone because I really do think that anyone of any age will enjoy this graphic novel as much as I did. Number 3 is one that I actually nearly forgot. Tress of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson. Tress is one of Brandon Sanderson's secret works that he did as a Kickstarter, I think it was. I think he wrote them throughout COVID, and this one was released this year. It is a companion/world expansion of the Cosmere universe, which is the universe in which most of Brandon Sanderson's writing takes place. That is books like The Way of Kings, the Mistborn series, etc, etc. I, however, have not read any of those as of yet. I have only read from the Cytoverse thus far, but that did not impact my enjoyability of this one whatsoever. Tress lives on an island. It's really quite small, it's isolated, and it's amongst a sea of green spores that are incredibly volatile and explode into giant vines when touched by liquids, and I'm sure you can imagine the chaos that ensues with that. But this is only one of the seas, and there's actually several other seas of different colours that all have different spores of different properties, which leads me to my first strength of this novel. Despite the fact that I have not read anything else from this universe, the world building was sound enough for me to understand who was who and what was happening. I was not confused. I did not question at any point who was talking, what was going on, or the magic system in any shape or form. No, that's a lie. There was some parts at the end that I was like, that's a bit odd, but I think that's because I haven't read the other books. But it didn't detract from the experience. I think it was just more of a nod and a little Easter egg if you have read those books. The second strength, and in my opinion, the biggest strength of this, is the characters. All of the characters were super likable. There were characters in this book that had such minimal roles, like a paragraph in the entire story, and I cared so much about their outcome, what happened, everything to do with those characters. And third, which kind of ties in as well, and I'm finding is really consistent across the Brandon Sandersons that I'm reading, his prose is simple yet descriptive enough to be devoured very, very easily, which is a huge plus for the fantasy series that he writes, given the size and length of them. Tress is one of those stories that I think I will continue to go back to. There is so much more to it than what I have described in this really short synopsis of it right now, but what I will say is that it does technically fall into the cozy fantasy genre. However, there are stakes, there are fights, there are battles, there are action scenes, if you could call them that. So don't go into it thinking that it is a Legends and Lattes experience, because it is not that kind of cozy fantasy. It falls into one of the other realms of cozy fantasy. So just be aware of that if you're gonna jump into it. All right, my second most liked book of this year is none other than A Man Called Ove by Frederick Bachman. Ove, Uva, I think it's Uva. I read this with Blair for our birthday because how cool is the internet that I can make a friend and then realize that our birthdays are on exactly the same day in exactly the same year, and then we can read a book together to celebrate it, and then have that book come out to be one of my favorite books of the year. Crazy. This is the story of Uwe, who is a curmudgeonly old man who has lived in the same village for decades. However, his status quo is somewhat turned upside down when a nosy but caring family moves in next door, which Uwe wants nothing to do with whatsoever. In this one, the structure of moving between past and present and exploring experiences that Ove had over his lifespan really brings a lot of depth to the narrative and the story. And props to the translator as well, who was able to translate this and still include so many of the nuances and experiences for a very different audience than what the book was originally intended for, I think. I was in tears at several stages throughout this book. I was actually reading it in the emergency room at the hospital with Jared for hours, and I had to put the book down so that I wasn't going to be seen sobbing in front of a room full of sick and injured people. I really don't want to tell you too much else about the plot of it, because I really do feel like this is one of those ones that you need to go in a little bit blind, going in knowing only the basics of Ove and his character, the general structure of the book, which is what I've given you. So in doing this, I have equipped you with what you need. The rest is up to you for when you go and explore this book. There's also a movie starring Tom Hanks and his son, and I watched that this year too, and it was good. And I cried just as much, if not more, than I cried reading the book. And I recommend if you're going to watch the movie and read the book first. This is the order, book, then movie. Enhances the experience on both ends. All right, before we jump into my favorite book of 2023, I'm going to just hit you with some honorable mentions because, like I said, there was some difficulty trying to pick the good books, the favorite books of the year. And in doing so, I ended up with some books that were good, and they definitely would have made like the top 10 list, but they just didn't quite hit the same way that the top 5 did. So I'm gonna keep you in anticipation for number 1, but if you don't wanna watch this, you can just skip ahead. I put the chapters down there, hopefully, if future Meekela has done her job well. Honourable mention number 1 is Skyward by Brandon Sanderson, the other Brandon Sanderson that I have read, the one in the Cytoverse. It is a sci-fi, it's following a colony of humans that are fighting for survival in space. Our narrator is a feisty pilot in training, and her dad was the colony's biggest deserter, which obviously is going to come with its own complications for her. It had really good world building and found family and camaraderie, and really embodied the underdog started at the bottom but were a prodigy vibes. We also had The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches by Sangu Mandana. This is a cozy fantasy following a witch in the real world who is posting TikToks about her magic, trying to pass it off as fake magic when she is commissioned by an old man and his husband to come and teach 3 young witches about their powers. However, in this world, the witches aren't supposed to be near each other for any lengthened period of time. This one is a true cozy fantasy, low stakes, some conflict, and a lovely enemies to lovers subplot romance in there as well. The Moth Keeper by Kay O'Neill, which is the first Kay O'Neill that I've read, and I loved because, hello, I'm Meekela, I love moths, if you did not know that. Beautiful art style, hit all the vibes that I needed at the time. However, I found that it lacked some of the oomph that Tea Dragon Society potentially had, but still phenomenal. I cannot get over the moths. I love the moths. Great graphic novel. Then we had Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies. I had high hopes for this one and they somewhat met them. It just fell slightly short with the writing style. It felt a little bit too encyclopedia-ish at the start. Second half picked up and really did make up for the rest of the story though, and the question mark romance in it made me a little bit weak at the knees for researchers studying fairies in nature. The Black Witch Chronicles by Laurie Forrest probably comes in at my favourite series that I read in 2023. It's not finished yet, the last book does come out next year, but it is my favourite series that I've read this year, mostly because of the sheer content volume that is included in the 5 books that I've read, but also the chronic listenability of it, because I did listen to these rather than read them. And my last honourable mention is rather a wild card that came out of nowhere this year, and it is Crush, which is the second book in the Crave series by Tracy Wolfe. This is a young adult fantasy series in its core. There's a vampire love triangle, there is hidden and forgotten and lost powers, and just endless quests to stop the big bad. In my opinion, the series peaked at this book number 2. I will caveat the writing is not great, but I did not come to the series for good writing. And it left me in a teenage, giggly, giddy, tummy butterfly fluttering state. And I did not expect that from a book with a vampire love triangle at the age of 28. And I think that's really why it's actually made the list. Rest of the series went downhill from here, but second one, loved it. It was great. And finally, my favourite book that I read in 2023 is actually books, and it will come as no surprise to anyone who has been here for any amount of time. It is The Complete Collection of the Tea Dragon Society by Kay O'Neill, which I'm aware is 3 books, but they're graphic novels. There's no rules here. We follow a young girl. She is training to be a blacksmith in the first one, and she stumbles across a tea dragon and is instructed to go and find the village's tea dragon keeper, where she learns to care for the tea dragons, makes new friendships, and all around just has a lovely cozy time. The art style, fabulous. The story, heartwarming. Tea dragons grow tea leaves on their bodies, and when you harvest and brew them, you get to experience the memories that you and the tea dragon have, or that the tea dragon has. If that is not the most magical experience that you would like to experience, I do not know what is. I think that this is such a simple but unique concept that was explored so well and executed so beautifully. Across the 3 different stories, we do go forwards and backwards in time. There are cameos back and forth between different characters in the series, and we really explore a lot of themes around finding your purpose in life, fitting in, and coming to terms for a couple of characters with a lot of quite tragic and difficult past experiences that they have had. It has skyrocketed to very close to the top of my favourite books of all time, and I suspect that I will be revisiting this once again many times in the future and gifting it to every single one of my family members for every birthday henceforth. And that's it. These are my favourite books that I read in 2023. What a year of reading. Spoiler for some upcoming videos, I am going to try and make my reading next year a bit more purposeful and try to read books that I'm actually interested in reading and know that I might like, because I think I've got a pretty decent sense of books that I would like in reading synopses and getting recommendations from people that I trust, so we're manifesting for next year that I have more of a difficult time picking my top books of the year. But that is all for today, so thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you're having a fantastic day or night or whatever time it is where you are in the world, and I will see you next year, but really next week. Goodbye.